Today on The Divide, for not having any discretion.
This is not sort of a discretionary call by the governor here.
The governor sure has a lot of discretion.
I'm announcing a 2-week pause.
The messaging problem that's left even Democrats questioning the rules. Also, King County Executive Dow Constantine on his bid for a 4th term. So should that lead people to question maybe your commitment to this job, or is this a fallback?
As I've probably observed to you before, this is actually the best place to get things done.
And his thoughts on being challenged by a fellow progressive.
Not surprised, a little disappointed.
That and more as we attempt to bridge the divide. Hello and welcome to The Divide. Thank you so much for being with us. We got a lot to get to today. A lot of it about everything that's transpired this week related to Governor Inslee's handling of the pandemic. So let's get right to it. After 14 months, Democratic lawmakers in our state are starting to question Governor Jay Inslee's logic as it pertains to COVID mandates. So much so that 8 of them, joined by 4 Republicans, wrote the governor a not-so-nice letter this week. In it, the Pierce County delegation took issue with other counties getting a reprieve from rollbacks while theirs got no such thing. They wrote that the governor's decision, quote, damages both our confidence and our communities. They went on to question the very thing that Inslee values most. We believe your announcement on May 4th runs counter to our understanding that science and fairness shape decisions and changes to the reopening plan. Democratic State Representative Mari Levitt of University Place.
Granted, Pierce County numbers are high, right? We're over 350, and we have some work to do. We do, and that's not the issue. It's not about our numbers being high. It's about a sense of fairness issue that Pierce just feels that we're being treated differently than others.
But that's not all. Democrats went as far as to threaten action should the governor not change course, writing in that letter, failure to do so will require us to consider asking our leadership to exercise the legislature's authority to call a special session and weigh legislative options. Weigh legislative options. Legislative options like putting checks and balances on the governor's emergency powers, a novel concept that apparently no other state lawmakers thought of before.
We all supported the initial actions that were taken. But it's about time that the legislature assert itself into that process.
We've yet to have a serious discussion on emergency powers, and that is not a political or partisan discussion in my view.
We could be in a permanent state of emergency here because we have no mechanism to get out of it.
Most people in Washington, including most of the press now, are questioning why there is not some defined end to this and why the legislature would end their session with no way of checking in on the most important executive powers.
And when we end up in a state of emergency with no end in sight that's been going on for a long period of time, it is vital that the people have a voice through their legislature.
We were elected to represent the people. And for the last 9 months, we have not necessarily been allowed to do that.
The Democratic majority has shown time and time again this session they are okay with a one-person rule. That is not okay.
Oh, that's right. Republican lawmakers made reining in the governor's emergency powers a key priority during the legislative session. And even as the session wrapped up in April, House Minority Leader J.T. Wilcox once again reiterated the importance of putting a check on Inslee's power.
Is there any issue that you think is so important that you would want to go to special session to get it right rather than try to wrap it up in the next 4 days?
I'd do an extra day if that's what it took to do emergency power reform. I don't want to go through this much uncertainty again. I don't want to be counting down 700 days of emergency with no legislative oversight.
So naturally, when Republicans caught wind this past week that a handful of Democratic lawmakers in Pierce County were planning to threaten a legislative special session to rein Inslee in after Republicans spent 105 days being thwarted by Democrats in their efforts to do so, well, Republicans were completely perplexed.
We had ample opportunity. Those same Democrats who put this letter forward had ample opportunity to work in a bipartisan way on some reforms on the governor's powers that could have avoided where we're at with this arbitrary decisions that we saw here this week.
And look, it is fair for Republicans to be a tad bit annoyed. They warned about the need to have lawmakers sign off once in a while on what the governor was doing. And it wasn't even about Governor Jay Inslee. It was about future governors. So the fact that some Democrats ignored those warnings, those ample warnings, until it negatively impacted their own constituents, well, that should serve as a lesson. Unfortunately, it is a lesson the people of Pierce County will bear the brunt of. All right. Coming up later in the show, we are going to stick to this topic a bit. People might be mad about the pause that Governor Inslee put into place this week, but is his problem simply one of messaging? That's coming up. But first, he wants voters to put him back in office for a fourth term. But has King County's elected leader done enough to deserve it? My sit down with Dow Constantine. Stick around. We told you last week that the race for King County Executive is shaping up to be a progressive showdown. On the show, you heard from State Senator Joe Wynn, who decided to take on three-term incumbent Dow Constantine, a member of his own party, something that in political circles can be considered a little bit taboo. I got a chance this week to sit down with Executive Constantine, who is seeking his fourth term. We spoke about his challenger and about the challenges the county faces. Is, if you win, 16 years too long to give control to one person over the county?
This is a particular moment. We're having enormous success advancing our agenda, but the upset, the tumult, the converging crises that have happened over the course of the last year have really convinced me that not only is my experience in leadership really valuable right now, but this is a time when we're able to push forward on some of the initiatives that we've been sort of dutifully working toward over the course of the last couple terms, like restoring the environment and helping the homeless off the streets and into housing with the services to keep them housed, and maybe most difficult of all, transforming the criminal legal system to meet the expectations and values of people today.
And I do want to talk about a lot of those things. One of the questions that had come up in recent years when you and I sat down is whether you were going to run for governor. And I don't know that you ever said no, you know, is sort of what's going to happen with Governor Inslee, and he decided to run. But is that a job you would have wanted had the governor not run for it again?
Yeah, I would have run for that if the governor didn't run for another term.
So should that lead people to question maybe your commitment to this job, or is this a fallback?
As I've probably observed to you before, this is actually the best place to get things done. We have a constituency that wants progress. We have the best business community probably of anywhere in the country. We have opportunities here to create change and create examples for other jurisdictions that are unparalleled. And so while serving as governor allows you to serve more people, I am in the enviable position of serving 2.3 million people who are very much aligned about what they want to see for their county and their communities.
It's such an enviable position, in fact, that a fellow progressive would like to take it from you. Were you surprised to see State Senator Joe Wynn challenge you?
Not surprised, a little disappointed. I mean, I think our values are very similar. If you look at my record, I don't need to explain my values. They're very much reflected in the work I've done. But my experience and my accomplishments, I think, speak for themselves.
You said disappointed. Why disappointed?
Well, you know, I would understand if there was someone coming from the right who had strong philosophical disagreements with me or the work we're doing. That is clearly not the case here. I mean, you might be able to identify negligible differences, but I think what you are seeing is a progressive government that is also clear-headed and competent, that is able to manage the business of the people efficiently. And I think that's what the residents of King County, the voters of King County want. That's what they've asked for, and that's why they've elected me previously.
On homelessness, let's just get through some of the issues here. You know, homelessness has become a growing problem. You have announced this new plan to try to get 500 people in reliable shelters, like what I like to call it, by the end of the year, which is ambitious. Would you be doing that if not for the money from the federal government that came because of COVID?
Well, the federal government money has been indispensable in allowing us to create this enhanced shelter, and that's what we're talking about. And it's actually a combination of strategies. Some of it is shelter like we have already in SHOWDOWN, which is 24 hours a day with services, indoor bathrooms, etc. Other parts of it are individual manufactured units. We're setting up a facility for people to bring their RVs and hook up to electricity and sewage rather than having to be parked on the streets. And all of that is critically important. But before all of the federal funding came, I set up Health Through Housing. And this is where we're going to rent, or rather buy, some 1,600 units, primarily hotel rooms, and move people into their own place with the on-site services to keep them housed. That, along with the enhanced shelter, is going to make a huge difference in what you see out here on our streets.
Yeah, 12 years though into your time as King County executive, do you share responsibility for it getting so bad over the past decade?
I mean, the challenge we've had is the overheated housing market that's just gotten worse and worse, along with growing income inequality. More people moving here, more money coming into the housing market, and the people who have not kept up getting squeezed out. And we've put hundreds of millions of dollars into building new subsidized housing, but it just hasn't been enough. It's actually the COVID crisis itself that has created the opportunity. With hotels not being full, we're able to buy them. We're able to move people directly from chronic homelessness into those places. And what we learned during COVID when we rented hotels for people is that they get better really quickly, not just avoiding COVID infection, but they get rested, they get cleaned up, they get centered, they have fewer behavioral health crises, and they're ready to accept the services that we can provide to them. It's a breakthrough. It's a breakthrough moment, and I don't know if you can tell, but I'm very excited about this, about the opportunity to finally turn the corner on a crisis that's been vexing for not just our government, but for the entire region.
We know there are homeless people outside of Seattle. How does this help those other communities that are dealing with homelessness, albeit not on the same level?
So homelessness is a regional challenge. I mean, it is a national challenge for sure, but it is a regional challenge, and it is not just Seattle. You see people on the streets of Seattle, but if you visit any of our major cities or the rural areas, you're going to find people living homeless. Just outside of Kent on a hillside, I visited a place where there were well over 100 people in shanties and tents up and over the top of the ridge. And I talked with them, and most of them were from there. They were from the Green River Valley. They were from Kent and Auburn and the cities in that area. And they were staying close to home because in their minds, they really felt that they were going to be able to get it together, to reconnect with their families and their friends, to reclaim the lives that they remembered. We need to make that possible for them.
You mentioned Kent. You know, when you guys opened that hotel, the COVID hotel, for people who were experiencing homelessness, the mayor of Kent was not happy with you, as you know. Are you a good partner to the leaders outside of the Seattle bubble?
We're a very good partner. We created the Regional Homelessness Authority and brought in all of the non-Seattle cities and gave them a full voice at the table. And that is even without them contributing funds or other material.
Because they were skeptical. They were skeptical.
But they are there, and they have just as big a vote as King County or Seattle or those with lived experience. During COVID, we had to act fast. And I did act fast. And part of being a leader is working with everyone and listening and bringing people along, but sometimes you also have to make hard decisions. And I can't emphasize that enough. The most uncomfortable times in this job are when you have to go and do things, say things, decide things that are going to be unpopular with people for the good of the community. I think you can see the results. We kept people healthy here. It's because we acted decisively and quickly.
I moved out of the city a year and a half ago, and I live in East King County now. And I think there are some people who have a hard time wrapping their mind around some of the headlines. You know, like the headline that you wanted to close the downtown jail. What's the current status of that?
Yeah. So adult and juvenile detention. The King County Jail in downtown Seattle is built on an old-fashioned model, and it is just plain obsolete. It needs to go away. It's also on a really valuable piece of property in the middle of the most dynamic downtown in this region. But we need to realize that that place is the second largest mental health facility, behavioral health facility in the state. And instead of continuing on this old carceral model in that old building, we need to focus on the people who need behavioral health treatment in order that they won't go back and reoffend. We need to focus our energies, including the state's energies, on providing much, much better treatment. And we can reduce the number of people who are, in the end, not getting better in jail. And increase the number of people who are getting the help they need to get their lives on track and quit victimizing others.
I think people would want to know just that you have a place that you're going to put the murderers and rapists.
Yeah, it's clear that we have people who cannot be released right now.
One more thing on criminal justice, the sheriff. You would like her to retire.
I would.
Your opponent would like her to resign.
Yeah.
What's the difference there of opinion? Either way, you can't force her to leave.
There's a lot of controversy swirling around the sheriff's office. The people voted to have the sheriff be an appointed rather than an elected position, and for the council to be able to adopt the duties and structure of the sheriff's office. And we are diving into that work, engaging with communities, figuring out what this is going to look like moving forward. Her continued presence is creating a lot of static. It's creating a lot of noise that's not aiding that conversation. If she were to simply gracefully exit the scene, it would lower the heat and allow us to shine a light on the difficult work ahead of us. And I don't blame her for wanting to serve out the term that she was elected to, but it's not helping us right now.
Who would you be looking for if you get another term? That would be your task. What kind of person do you want in that job?
Well, by the end of the year, we will have launched a national search. And we need someone who, yes, can manage a sheriff's office, but importantly, help lead change. Because the expectations of the public around what policing is going to look like in America have changed. My expectations have changed. We understand that a lot of the tragedies that happen in our communities are because we're asking the police to solve every problem. We send them to engage with people who are in behavioral health crisis. We need behavioral health professionals there to intervene, to unwind the crisis, to help people to safety. And in fact, even ahead of this, I'm setting up in the Pioneer Square area a 24-hour-a-day behavioral health team to go out on the streets to engage those folks that you and I both see who are clearly having real challenges, to try to get them somewhere safe where they can get treatment rather than having them be the next person the police get into a confrontation with tragic results.
Do you want a civilian in that job or a law enforcement officer in that job?
I think we want the right person in that job.
So you're open to either?
I'm open to either.
Do you have a
yes.
preference?
I don't have a preference. We have members of the public, we have elected officials, we have law enforcement professionals in this conversation that we have launched. And we are going to come up with the best person to both manage the department and lead us forward into a new model of policing.
Yeah, and Dow Constantine and I, we chatted for about a half hour there on the beautiful beaches of West Seattle, coffee in hand. And you can catch more of that interview if you're so inclined coming up tomorrow on the Divide podcast. All right, coming up after the break, some closing thoughts on Governor Inslee's messaging mistakes. Stick around. Governor Jay Inslee exercised his discretion this past week in putting a pause on the Healthy Washington plan, a last-minute decision that allowed several counties to avoid tighter restrictions.
Today, I'm announcing a 2-week pause on our phased reopening plan.
It is the second time in a row that the governor has made exceptions that allowed counties to avoid rollbacks. I asked him whether changing the rules not once but twice would be viewed by some as arbitrary.
This is not the governor throwing a dart at a dartboard. It's our government responding to the scientific information that we look in infinite detail.
And look, here's the reality. Responding to a changing pandemic is exactly what the government ought to be doing. Governor Inslee is right to make decisions based on what's in front of him on any given day and to pivot when it makes sense to change course. The problem is that the governor himself is the one who has led us to believe that his reopening plans are not discretionary.
It'll just be looking at the numbers, and we've already announced the metrics. I just want to reiterate that. This is not sort of a discretionary call by the governor here.
That was Governor Inslee on April 8th, just days before he ultimately used his discretion to keep some counties from falling backward. Fast forward 3 weeks as King and other counties were once again on the precipice of going back to phase 2, and the media once again asked Governor Inslee whether he might make exceptions.
At the moment, there is not serious consideration for changing these metrics.
But again, just days later, after saying no serious considerations were being made, Governor Inslee made some serious considerations in a pretty short period of time. Again, saving counties from rolling backward, including King.
Today, I'm announcing a 2-week pause on our phased reopening plan.
So if anyone is to blame for the feeling that these decisions are arbitrary, it is the governor himself. Rather than simply make it clear to people that these metrics were likely to adjust over time, which is reasonable, he stood behind them, made us believe they were not fluid, then changed his mind at the 11th hour, not once but twice, all while taking umbrage with those who pointed out the confusion and consternation that his messaging caused.
In our newsroom, we've just received a text from one of the restaurant owners who says, he just changed the rules again. How can we trust the process?
Well, I hope that restaurant is happy that I changed the rules again so we can stay at 50%. I can't believe he wouldn't believe that was a good thing. So really happy that we've changed the rules to allow restaurant owners to stay open at 50%. I have to believe that would be a popular position with the restaurant industry. Now, he can stay at 25% if he'd like. That's his decision. I'm not making him do so. So we think this will be well received.
Again, it's not that businesses aren't relieved not to have to roll backward. It is the messaging. The idea that while under immense financial strain that is out of their control and that has lasted more than a year, these business owners would be told that they should be happy.
I can't believe he wouldn't believe that was a good thing.
So my message to the governor would be this. If you don't want people to question your motives, you might want to spend a little more time on your messaging. All right, we got a little time left in the show. I wanted to hear from some of you on something. I had a observation on Twitter this week. Some people ask me sometimes what I learn kind of from covering politics. I wrote on Twitter this week, the single biggest thing I've learned as a political reporter, party loyalty is an illness. And I really do believe this. You see the hypocrisy firsthand playing out year after year. I wanted to hear what some of you thought of that. Let's see what we got here. Todd, unfortunately, too many politicians only care about the color of their jersey. It's the red team versus the blue team. The only people who lose is the general public. Nothing is done logically. Everything has a side and an agenda. Janelle, I hope I'm saying that name correctly. That's a pretty name. Anytime integrity and values are surrendered for the sake of pleasing a single person or group, you can count on dysfunction. It's a guarantee. Yeah, that's pretty true. Let's get one more in here before we close the show. Neil, anytime integrity, oh wait, what do we got from Neil? I've never understood why someone would vote for an individual simply due to their party affiliation rather than the individual's stance on relevant issues. I never understood that either, Neil. And the good news is, that's why we have this show, to really look at issues absent political party. It's what we encourage people to do every single week. And I am so glad that those of you who watch the show are willing to take off your political caps, even if it's only for 30 minutes a week, and join us in that effort. All right, thank you so much, as always, for joining us on The Divide. Until next week, do something to bridge the divides happening in your own life. I'll see you tomorrow on Q13 News This Morning.